going to go ahead and get started. Thank you, everyone. I'm Philip Seawright with AKF Partners. Got my colleague Doug in Minneapolis and Victoria, who's off camera right now. This is our first of currently planned 20 of these. This is actually a shorter version, though, of our in-person private class that some of your bosses or colleagues or have attended that we still in person. That format was 2 days in person and then 3 longer sessions. So this we're actually going to break up, and we're offering A for free, but also B, we cover a lot of topics. So we're hoping to introduce these piecemeal. We will have recordings available, but we hope that you can join the live sessions whenever possible. Feel free to invite any of your friends to these. We're using a webinar capability of Zoom, so we can add more people as needed, though. So, and we can, at the current size, we can definitely keep this interactive. So our series goals, what we're going to walk you through is our models. We'll give you a bit of an explanation of who AKF is, how we think about things. Most of you are familiar with us, but we really want to get into how the interaction of architecture and how that ties into the structure of your organization, but all the processes. And as you grow and scale, when those get out of sync, problems occur. And for any of you that are in companies that are older than 5 years, you start to see these problems. Some of you are in companies that are 10 to 20 years old, and we kind of trace back where some of these challenges are. The third thing, we're going to touch on these over the next 2 sessions, being able to speak the language of the business and understanding financial documents and being able to articulate what goes on in your organization. And then lastly, what does the product mindset mean, and having a product mindset with tied to services. So we're going to separate those out. So this is, again, I mentioned the longer version. We're covering almost all the same topics. This is about 30 hours of content. We're going to cover about 20 hours of it. But with follow-ons, if you are free to reach out to us directly if you have any questions. We're going to cover a lot of the same topic content that we do in person. So the schedule, today we're going to cover the role of CTO in management leadership. In 2 weeks, Doug will cover accounting. December 6th, we're going to do technical debt, in a particular explaining technical debt back to the business. The 20th, we'll do organization design. A lot of you are familiar with that, but it's really it's the research behind small, durable, autonomous teams. Early January, we'll do OKRs. And then most of January and February is getting into some of our architectural concepts. March and April is product management, for those of you that are not familiar with product management, and also a bit of process management. When we get into May and June, that's big data, more from an analytics, but also into machine learning. And they get into July, transformations. We'll be doing change management and domain-driven design. We can switch these around if there's some consensus with the audience, and we can cover any of these topics if you want to reach out to some of us. A lot of you have engagements with AKF, and we can talk about these. Our background. Now, all of us are in our 50s that are going to be teaching this course. Some ones in the future may be a bit younger. So that means we joined the workforce before the internet. We grew up when you actually when you wrote a report in high school, you had to go check out a book from a library. It was only one copy. We know terms like the Dewey Decimal System. So we're old, but we've also been in your shoes. We're former operators. And so we understand the challenges you're going through. And of course, we're working with a lot of you right now to help you scale your company. We do some other courses that are very focused. We have an architect workshop that's really targeted just to the engineers and really the technical architects. We'll also do Agile and Lean. That's where we'll go into either one of those and really the foundations of those. A lot of you have gone through Agile transformations. Technology for product managers, that's something that we've taught recently, earlier this year. And this is when you have a product management team, a lot of them don't have a technology background. And so we give them the basics so they can understand how to bridge the gap back towards the engineering team. And then we'll also have a very focused session on splitting and merging monoliths and platforms. This is the really technical stuff that requires a background in domain-driven design. So those are some of our other courses that we teach. Typically in a private session, but sometimes public also. All right. So we'll start with the role of the CTO, and we're going to start out with the chat initially. And I want to get some answers. So the first question I'd like to see in the chat, what does what is a CTO? In particular, we're looking for a CTO versus a CIO or some other role. So I'd like to hear your quick definitions of what a CTO is in the chat. I'll give you about a minute there. Yeah, these are great answers. I see a lot of strategy in here. This is very good. Often leading engineers. The second question, what makes a successful CTO? And you can use just one or two traits. You can throw out 5 or 6 traits. Let's see some of those answers too. And we're going to go through some slides that cover these too. I'd like to get your thoughts on what you've seen. All right, well, you guys are not going to need a lot of coaching on these. These are great answers. I like Brian's here. Level under pressure. Very good. Exceptional hiring acumen, breadth of technical knowledge, collaborative across functions. These are great answers. All right. Very good. I do not see any wrong answers here on the list. Let's go through the slides here and see how we match up with these responses. Again, all very good responses. So first and foremost, the CTO is an executive, a business executive, and they have to be at the table. They have to understand the challenges. And if you're not at the table, you're not going to be able to guide the technology. So this is one of our clients, Camille Fournier, the CTO of Rent the Runway. I'm not sure if we have any of the Rent the Runway folks on the call here, but you are a business executive, although you may have a technology background. The roles differ, and I think a lot of you already covered this, the CTO versus a CIO, and we have a visual of this. You may have a CSO reporting to you. In some organizations, we see a VP of engineering may have a similar title to a CTO, but typically they're just at a VP level. Smaller companies may have more VPs reporting to them, but typically most of these we see roll up to the CTO, whether it's a data platform, data science, technical operations, overall platform. We see those roll up to that organization. So one of the things we'd like to focus on here is at the highest level, a CTO versus a CIO. The CTO is dealing with product, and a CIO is generally focused more on internal systems. Now, most of the attendees here understand that, but most executives may not understand the difference between a CTO and a CIO and the importance of that. So when executives are hiring, when they're looking at resumes, they may not understand the difference between a CIO and a CTO. Generally, the CIO is focused on the workforce, and the SLAs are different. For example, availability is usually relied upon by a third party. And so you're contracting others, whereas the CTO, you are fully responsible for availability for all of your customers. And so the engineering necessary is much, much higher. CIOs generally do have a strong business background, but they probably don't have as much of a technology background. And then CIOs often have additional systems that are marketing related, sales related, customer support related. A CTO should have both of those efforts, or in many cases, all of those. So it's the technology that provides the service or product for your customers, the tools used by your workforce, and then all adjacent tools that support those organizations. So the traits that we look for, and we'll get to this later, but it's results. That's all that really matters is, did you get the job done in a way that's ethical and legal? So if there's one thing you want to take away from the course, it's this equation here. Results is all that matters. Yes, you create the technical vision. We saw that before. If you cannot articulate that vision, then you're not going to have others being able to follow you. And we have some future topics that really focus on how do you create that vision and explain that to others going forward. It's one thing for people to have a vision, but if others don't understand that vision, you're not going to have followers either within the engineering organization or within the business. And that's why we say lead from the front, which means you sometimes have to be a visionary, but also have an operational mindset to make sure you're following along, going in the direction that you desire. The CTO should be responsible for setting the goals, and we'll get into OKRs in a future session, but they should be aggressive, measurable, and attainable. And that's really what OKRs will drill into. They are responsible for the culture of the organization and the processes, and those are tightly tied together. Poor processes can lead to poor culture. Poor culture can also lead to poor processes, but understanding that interaction is critical as a leader. This is one thing that, and many of you are seeing this now as emerging leaders, is when to learn to delegate, how to delegate certain decision-making versus what decisions should you not delegate to others. And then, of course, this is the one that we see the biggest gap often is having the business acumen, and not just within your industry, but being able to articulate how your technology maps in terms that the CFO can understand and head of sales can understand, and other folks, even the legal departments. And lastly, as an executive, they also have additional duties. And this is by law in all states, all 50 states, some slight variation in 1 or 2 states, but they have a duty of care, and they are viewed upon by the shareholders. And they have this duty of care, duty of loyalty, and this should be intuitive to most of you, but this is by law, your duty of loyalty and care and of good faith. And you can be sued as an individual, as an executive. Unlike at a level below, you're protected generally from this kind of lawsuit. But as you become a CTO, you are exposed to this level of liability. So it's something that's not taught to a lot of CTOs when they make that promotion, but it's something that you need to be aware of. And so just be aware of that additional responsibility that you have as you become a CTO. All right, so let's get into some of the barriers that we see and why people do not become a good CTO. Now, let me actually ask that question in the chat. What are some of the barriers that you've seen previously to CTOs that did not do well in previous stops that you've had? And you don't have to name your current situation. So again, articulate things you've seen in the past of where you've seen CTOs not do well.
Yeah, good. Focus on business and not seeing, focus on technology, not seeing the business side.
Yeah.
Reactive.
Yep. Slow. Yep.
I like the first one too. The very good vision, but not a good executor.
Mm-hmm. Setting unrealistic delivery expectations. Yep.
It's a good one. I'm interested, Trent, to learn a little more on that one.
Well, I think I think an important part there is on that last slide is around setting attainable expectations there. And so certainly if you are a business leader and you externally express an expectation to customers or to the street or whatever that the org can't actually deliver on, that's obviously going to be a huge issue.
Yeah, I'll share my experience there was that it was difficult for me to constrain my business executives' desire for us to achieve. We often had a pretty good picture of what we could achieve, but had to ramp ourselves up to get there. I spent most of my life as a CIO implementing large business systems across multiple geographies.
Yeah, I'm going to get Dan's response to there, disconnected from the teams doing work. Is that one you think that just it was too much delegation or actual lack of how things work?
Yeah, lack of understanding of how things work, and then the team on the ground giving feedback that, hey, this isn't going to work. I've seen issues in the past where that's a struggle.
Yeah. And that's the risk of how we see in some companies. What they'll do is at an executive level, they like to rotate people throughout different leadership roles within the company. And they may come from a finance side, but they're promoted in and rotated in at too high a level. And so a finance person may not have the technology background. So they're going to be very disconnected. They may have been a master of their domain within finance, but just lack the technical skills. Or someone has been promoted so long ago, they just assume that their team is just delivering work. So very good answer there, Dan. All right. Well, let's get into what we call the experiential chasm here. And I want to just kind of walk through what we see in the market in a particular, and this is from Gartner, which a lot of you may have Gartner subscriptions, Korn Ferry, which is a hiring firm, and then also HBR. CIOs, they have a very high turnover. So the average turnover rate is 4 to 5 years. Think of that compared to some of the other leaders in the company. How often do you see turnover in legal or head of finance? You might see that kind of turnover in sales, but across all the leadership roles reporting to the CEO, the CIO or the CTO are the ones that have the shortest duration. So, and the reason they have that shortest duration is exactly, we talked about this chasm between the business and technology. Look at in Harvard Business Review, they were shown in their research for chief digital officers only 2.5 years, because that at the time this was written, that's not necessarily CTO. CDO was a fairly new role, but they really have trouble selling their accomplishments to the business. They just don't speak the language. So looking at it graphically, one of the jobs that you guys mentioned was connecting the business and the technology strategy. And how does your technology tie to aspects that actually drive revenue or costs? So, and we're going to show this as two separate worlds, and we want to close these two worlds. But on one side, you've got the business executive, the other had the technology executive. In general, and we're going to talk about a lot of stereotypes here, but technology folks think in zeros and ones. We've thought how to build things, where business executives generally think of in dollars. So you're already speaking, your primary language is very different. And this is where this chasm exists. And I'll ask the audience, is it easier for the business executive to learn technology or for the technology executive to learn the business? Go ahead and put that in the chat. What your thoughts are. Which one is easier? Yeah. Agreed. Just think of all the engineering you've had. Yeah. You're exactly right. Yeah. Good answers. All right. I'll let the witness. So the reason for that, most technology leaders have a STEM degree. We tend to be introverted, although I'm a bit more extroverted. And the way that we have progressed in our careers is through technology achievements. But until to a certain point, they may not have that much in common with a business executive. Usually a CEO has a business degree. If not their undergrad degree, often they have an MBA. They're more likely to be extroverted, whether they came from a sales side or a finance side. They tend to be the ones that are able to articulate and have networked very well. And their success came from sales, closing deals, relationships, and networking, but they may not have as much in common with the technology executive. So keep in mind that how they got to where they are, the skills that it took them to get there is very different than what the skills that took you to get to where you are and where you want to be. So we would just want you to think through that as you start looking at your leadership in your company, and particularly the next level down. And we're going to show you some slides that help you visualize that even more. So we're going to focus on how can we come to the right side. And then later in the courses, we'll teach you some techniques, how to bring the business over to the technology side, how to start teaching them some concepts to build trust. So what we find the best executives, they define metrics that are important to the business. So they can articulate revenue, cost. In this one, time to market, we're going to hammer this through all of our topics. That's one of the biggest barriers we see is, when do things start to slow down? How can you speed things up? And how does that impact the business? What are some of the barriers to entry? Being able to understand how the technology and product you deliver applies to customer retention. So these are all keys that you need to understand and be able to explain to the business. How does the technology impact those metrics. The technology team also needs to understand, how do you make money in your business? What drives revenue? Is it the product itself? Is it the sales funnel? Is it the tail end, referrals? Really also understanding who your competitors are in your landscape. Just understanding that will help you understand the pace that you need to do, and being able to understand the current year's goals and future year goals. And then from that, how does your strategy meet those objectives? So that's where you have the business is thinking in terms of dollars. The CTO, it generally falls on the CTO's role. You can't delegate it always to product, but the CTO is responsible for this, and then they in turn translate it to the technology team. In the past, we've seen technology leaders miss this, and they rely on lower level roles such as a business analyst or product manager, maybe a key architect to understand that. Ultimately, the CTO has to be the one understanding that translation engine between the business and the technology. So we're going to leave these slides and leave behind just to keep us going. But these are some of the questions that we asked to see, did the technology leader, were there any reasons they caused there to be the gap? And this is where they are creating that chasm versus closing it. So, some of the things we like to see is the technology leader able to explain progress on dates? And are you seeing the same things over another in the future? So if the business still sees you're slow to deliver this quality issues, leaders typically will get fired if they're not improving that. And when you make a technology decision, can you explain it in terms of business benefit versus then technical merit? So meaning, can you explain that this thing is more likely to fail or break, or this will have a larger blast radius? Those are things that you have to be able to explain as a technology team. And if there is for example, a large blast radius, how does that impact your business? You as a leader will have to be able to cascade that down to your team, and you want your team members almost all the way down to the individual contributor level to understand the market that you're in and how you're competing. And the technology leadership, CTO, direct reports, really need to understand what is the business facing. So if you're missing in any of these areas, the technology team is one causing that gap. Conversely, we also see on the business side, there may be some contributions to the gap where they keep replacing people too frequently. Or do the business people may end up hearing the same responses from whoever they put in place, but they still don't believe them. They want to keep bringing new people in that give them different answers. One thing we seldom see, but it's do business leaders take as much time learning to understand the technology landscape of their company as much as they spend time trying to read their financial statements? In a lot of cases, we see them just delegate and assume that whatever the CTO or CIO is telling them is all that's important. And do business leaders need to know, when do they have the right spidey sense to know whether the dates are aggressive or achievable? A lot of you mentioned in the chat that sometimes they just don't understand what's achievable and why it's not achievable. This is an important one too that we see, and this is a big transformation, which is when the business has an idea, a big idea, are they involved early enough to define success? In a lot of cases, they've already envisioned an outcome. It's typically capturing a large bit of market share, or they're going to sign some big deals because they've heard a pain point and they think this one feature is going to close this deal and is going to meet that, versus really defining success up front so that you can incrementally get to where you want to be. And this is ultimately gets down to OKRs and thinking in a different mindset. So, and these are some things that a technology leader cannot control, that you just need to be aware of if your business leaders may have these struggles here. You can try to close that gap as much as you can, but in some cases, you just are not in a position to close that gap. But we're going to give you as many techniques and approaches as you can to pull those people as closer and close that gap as much as you can. So one thing we wanted to walk you through was what we described before and this is a view of a product manager and in this particular role, but we've shown you this view And we're going to ultimately get to CEO, CTO, and some of those higher level roles. But we want to walk you through those typical career paths. Let's start at the bottom. Most of you, we assume, came from a CS undergrad or an engineering undergrad, maybe an MIS undergrad, became a developer or an analyst, or a senior developer into a product manager. Just in the chat here, if you don't mind, tell me your undergrad background in the chat. Look at that, CS, CS, CS. Music theory.
Music.
I like that.
That is good.
That's a lot of math, as I understand. Well, it depends where you took it. So
music, math, and language all swim in the same side of the brain, so it all works.
Yeah. So most of you, I assume, have all taken this. There's another branch here we're going to show you have taken this bottom track here. When you're dealing with product managers and sales, we just want to walk you through that typical path too. And these are the people you will probably interact the most with in your current roles and as you become a CTO. So the business undergrad might become an operational leader within the business, or they may have gone and gotten an MBA, and then they come into product, or they may be leader within operations. Sales is often a subject matter expert, or they're just a sales expert. But we're showing this path for someone that becomes a product manager. The way that sales managers get promoted is, can you manage other sales leaders, and can you ultimately manage lots of big deals, close deals, but you're managing a sales workforce. The developer path, you become either director of engineer, you may take a route through architect, but you become a director of engineering. And then that's the typical path to get to CTO. Then there may be multiple paths within there. If you weren't an architect, you may have come from a pure infrastructure background. Some cases you may come from a QA background, but usually it's a director of engineering role that gets promoted to CTO. And product managers are typically the ones that get promoted to chief product officers or VP of product. So we're looking at this bottom right here of where you are. Those three are some of the key people that report to the CEO. So I assume most of you on the call are within the senior developer to director of engineering role within the company. So in your case, your sphere of influence is around here, right? This is your network of people you interact with typically. So you can influence your peers within technology. You can influence your primary product manager, most of your product managers. A lot of you are probably interacting with sales at the sales level. As you go from director of engineering up to CTO, your sphere of influence is different, okay? So you have a different group of stakeholders that you need to influence. Some of you may be doing this now, but as a CTO, the whole network of people you work with, you now need to work with the COO, the CFO, general counsel, but also you're more likely to interact directly with the board. And I know some of you on the call already are interacting with your board members. So the more that you can understand how these other folks operate and how they tick and the career paths they took, it's going to be easier for you to translate and understand their path. So I'll ask, how many of you have worked with a VP of sales recently? And I'll probably call out David. What's it like interacting with a sales team versus maybe work you've done at your previous, versus how does that differ from your previous stop?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we don't really, well, it's a combination of the roles that we have today here is a combination of sales and marketing. But yeah, I mean, my experience with those, individuals are really focused on customer commitments and, driving clarity of timelines and, revenue outcomes, which then we need on the engineering side, we need to be able to translate that into, work breakdown structures and schedules and, architecture plans and recommendations and dependencies and all that activity, versus, others in the organization are, sometimes looking at, I would say broader product strategy and evolution of like where we're trying to take, maybe the market, where we're trying to, operate in maybe new markets and new opportunities. So it's I would say it's different for at least my experience and how I'm working with the current teams here at my current company.
Yeah, and I understand you also have a new VP of product too that helps you translate. And there's kind of a layer between those, but I assume you're also having to triangulate between product and sales as a CTO because they have different competing needs that may not have been as visible, when you were more junior in a company. Is that
Yeah.
fair? Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a valid statement.
Yeah. So it's just new stakeholders you work with, and who their sphere of influence is very important as well, that you understand who's influencing them. This visual is also, we want all of you to understand why a lot of folks that become CTO also need executive coaching. A lot of times they may not have been put in a position to be in front of a board, how to present to the board, how to present them in a short amount of time, what your strategy is. A lot of folks might present to a CFO, maybe a CEO, but presenting to the board is yet another level of maturity that's going to be needed, and some skills that are needed as you move up the chain to CTO. So they're all going to be thinking in terms of business terms. You might be fortunate if you have a board member that understands technology. So almost everyone you're interacting with, once you get to this level of the company, is thinking in terms of the business. So that's why we're hammering this slide quite a bit. We just want to make sure you understand why it's so important to understand a lot of these business topics we're going to be covering in the next few sessions. All right. So we're going to switch topics now to leadership and management. And we're going to use the chat again. And question number 1 is, what's the definition of management? And then the second question we're going to have a different set of threads. We'll do, what's the definition of leadership? So Doug, if you don't, yeah, thank you, Doug. I'd like to get your thoughts on definition of management. And we intentionally define these words differently, not define them, but call these out differently. I swear some of these folks have our slides in advance. Stephen he's already foreshadowed. I like John's definition there.
Management is minutia.
Uh-huh. All right. For those of you, these are great. For some of you that didn't get to answer the leadership question, what is the definition of leadership? And if you feel like some of the other answers are already given, you don't have to add more if you don't want, but
Good terms.
these are very good. This is
Vision,
interesting,
guidance.
Doug. Yeah.
The guide,
Yeah.
not
Doug and I teach this course live and in person, and I feel like we get better answers here in this format than we do live. And I think it's because people take turns speaking when we're live, and now everybody can just freely answer their questions. I like this.
set a path that others are happy to follow. That means you've got a good communication flow and people understand what the vision is and see themselves in it.
Yeah. Let's
Good.
take Trent off mute and have him explain that one. It's very interesting. He said happy to follow.
Well, I think it was just trying to indicate both, there's strategic direction, but I guess there's the implication that you're not the person who's executing on that. You have to leverage potentially a large organization in order to execute on that, which means a lot of, again, setting the general direction, but then relying on the autonomy and the talent that you have at your disposal to actually execute on those things and hopefully enjoy doing it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's much more enjoyable if you're going to spend at least 8 hours a day working on this, that you enjoy your job. It's the majority of your for most folks, most of their waking hours are on their job. So it's management and leadership is a lot easier, or being a leader is easier if your workforce is happy. Very good. All right, last question for you. Which one's more important between the two? And if there is, why? Why is one more important between the two traits?
Stephen, that's a chicken's answer.
Yep.
I've gone back and forth. That's great. Good point. Strong leadership makes management easier.
That's very well said.
Yeah, it begs the question, is there anything to manage if there's not leadership there to establish the vision?
Let me get Jason's response on where you need both at different levels. Can you explain that a bit more?
I like the last one that you just said. It kind of goes into it is you need to have strategy at the upper levels of leadership, and you need to have tactical execution at the lower levels. And so I feel like both need to be there to have the management be effective. But the last thing that you guys said about if you don't have a good strategy, there's really not much to execute. So you could have great executioners with no strategy, and you're not really going to you'll make progress, but it may not be in the right direction. So I think you kind of need both, but senior leaders should be in leadership, lower management should be more in the management realm.
Some of what you're hitting there, I think it speaks towards growth too. Organizations are organisms. They're either growing or waning, and a leader helps establish a growth target. A manager often will manage what has been established, but doesn't necessarily take it beyond and grow.
These are all very good answers. Let's walk through our approach to it. And I can't remember who up there did push versus pull, but that's exactly how we describe that too. Stephen, just give me had you seen our slides, or is this something you had just been taught to?
I honestly can't remember if I either read it from HBR in the past or I have been in a session or two from with AKF partners, so it may have come from there. I don't remember, but I've used it a lot.
Good. It's a great way to think about it. Yeah, the leadership is trying to influence others to get to a specific objective. So you are literally pulling the organization to where you want them to go, but management is just getting those behaviors to change, removing the obstacles, giving the feedback, and that's more the pushing. So in some ways, it's a different personality trait, and a lot of us may not naturally have both of those, and so they're very different. So the way that we look at that, we'll skip that, but I just want to jump to what we call the leadership equation, and it's a function, if you think of it mathematically, of just characteristics that you have, your ability to innovate, your perseverance, how you're perceived by others, but we say it's really unlimited other factors that influence your ability to lead. So there is no theoretical upper limit, but each of us personally have limitations that we can do. So, and you don't have to put this in the chat, but I just want you to write this down for yourself. Which of these do you think you need to improve on from a leadership perspective? And just write this down on a piece of paper or OneNote, your favorite note-taking app for yourself. And I'll give you 2 minutes to just write those down, your initial thoughts of what you need to do as an individual to improve. And it could be inspiration from somebody you've seen or things you see that are lacking. But think about this for yourself, what you need to improve on. Doug, I think we need a Jeopardy soundtrack to throw in every now and then.
And I will have some audio cues to fill in the gaps.
Yeah. I won't ask you to state what you did, what each of you wrote down. So I just want you to keep that to yourselves. All right, management. So what we see, the very best managers, they have an eye for detail. And they will break down everything that's needed to get the job done. They'll also need great interaction skills. They know what the obstacles are, but they really can measure. We repeated it 3 times, measure, measure, measure. So this is also a mathematical function of your characteristics. Are you wired this way? Are you oriented? And a lot of you may have taken some personality type assessments yourself to know, are you oriented this way? How you can interact with others to, for your team or even your peers, how can you capture this? And are you focused on measurement and outcomes? And again, also multiple other factors that allow you to push your team. So also you have theoretically no unlimited upper bound. So in a similar way, I want you guys to write down which of these things. Good question, John. People interaction skills here we add is when you're pushing your team, trying to manage them, it's how do you manage them? So it's not so much like and we'll get to this later on about having your team do things, but it's how can you influence your team when you want to measure things and getting them to achieve something. So it's also people interaction skills here because you're going to be actively measuring someone and being comfortable in that. So that's why we put something here. Good question, John. So go ahead for you in your own write down, which of these do you think you need to improve upon to become a better manager? All right. I hope everyone, just in the chat, can you just say that you did write something down for yourself? You don't have to, for those of you that have did write, just put yes. Yeah, great. Thank you. All right. Good job. All right. So we've wrapped up the content just for the first session, the role of CTO, management leadership. We're going to provide these slides for you. We'll have a recording available for this. In 2 weeks, we are going to cover accounting. Doug is going to cover the most important accounting aspects that you need to have for a CTO to understand. And it's really to be able to explain to the CFO how your teams interact and how your technology is impacted on different parts of financial statements, though. Thank you, Brian. So it's a foundational one before you get to December 6th. So it's a very useful course. If any of you took an accounting in the past, it'll be a quick review. For those of you that have never taken accounting or forgotten everything you learned about it, it'll be a quick review also. So, yep, David, we will be sharing the slides with you. And then we're very excited about December 6th. I think a lot of you will be too when we get into technical debt. So looking forward to have you guys participate for the next two. Before we wrap this up, does anybody have any other questions they want to ask? And if you want us to stay on later, let us know. But any open questions that you guys have? All right. Well, thank you everyone for your first one. Please get your colleagues to join us if you can. And we will see you guys in 2 weeks. Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody. We'll see you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
You.
Thank you.